So let's start out. Last week, before we closed last week, Patty asked a question about delusion, and so I thought we'd just run through and see what the Bible has to say about that. And then I've got a couple articles, and if we get time, we'll jump into the notes, and I'll do the best I can to remember what they are. But at any rate, delusion. Bible says in 2 Thessalonians, we'll get to that in a moment, that for those that are left behind after the rapture that have heard the gospel, that God's going to send them very powerful delusion. So let's just, before we get to that, take a look at a few verses, very familiar verses, I think, to everyone, in Romans chapter 1, and beginning in verse 18, where it states, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. So, there's different types of wrath. There's the wrath, the tribulation, and then there's what's called, some call abandonment wrath, where God will just turn people over and abandon them to their own evil ways. And I think the abandonment wrath is what's being referred to here. And it gets to the issue of people that have heard the gospel. God knows their hearts. He knows that there are going to be those. He knows who they are that, for whatever reason, just refuse to accept him. And so, as Jan Markell has said, and I know I've said this many times, the four scariest words in the Bible is God turned them over. In other words, he's going to stop contending with them and pushing them to come to accept him. Verse 19, since what may be known about God is plain to them, in other words, the creation reveals God. People often wonder, what about those that haven't heard the gospel? And only God knows the correct answer, but I know that my brother, who is not yet a believer, says, well, I know there's something. Because I just look at the clouds, I look at the sky, I look at creation, and it couldn't just have fallen into place. Anybody that thinks that, and there are those that do, plenty that do, have their heads on backwards. But at any rate, since what may be known about God is plain for them to see, because God has made it plain for them. So the creation God has made, and we know all the stories that if the sun were a half a mile closer or half a mile further away from the earth, we would cease to exist, and the complexities of our bodies and our complexities of creation, and it's just prima facie evidence that there has to be a God. So he's done that for us. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. I was talking to someone not too long ago who says, well, just give me the evidence. Give me the evidence, something I can put my arms around and hold on to. Well, God's already done that. The evidence is there. It's crystal clear. So how much more do you need? You've chosen to ignore it. And that's the thing. God gives us a free will, so we choose and make our own decisions, whether it's to accept or reject who he is. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. You go through your whole life, and man, I'm a believer that at the very moment, whether it's the rapture or the moment of death, everybody is going to be eye to eye with the Lord Jesus Christ. And those that haven't accepted him are going to be, I just can't imagine what it's going to be like. But there's going to be no excuses, it says here. They neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. And that's what happens, is that after a while, people that reject the truth, they just become dark, and they actually, I think, reach a point where they're unable to know or to hear the truth of the gospel. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. Think of all the people that we know and listen to that they're just so wise. They have all the answers. But as it says in Psalms, God says those who do not believe in him are fools. And that's exactly what's being stated here as well. And exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. In other words, it's a it's a comment upon false idols that people tend to worship and to fall behind. And they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over. There's those 4 words. Over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. So basically, this is saying that after a while, God will pull back. And he will no longer contend with them because he created us with a free will, and I think that there is a point when he just doesn't do it anymore. He knows the hearts. He knows the hearts of people, and so that's what happens. Because of this, God gave them over to their shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Does that sound familiar today?
Yep.
Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. And think about the fact that, we celebrated one day, Memorial Day one day. That was it. 4th of July is coming up one day. But we've dedicated an entire month to what we know.
To what?
Pride Month.
Oh, that's bad.
Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind, so that what they do what they ought not to do. They become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent. And I think God-haters is kind of at the base of everything. From this hatred of God flows all these other things. And we're seeing a tremendous spread, I think, today of a hatred for God among the elites and so many other people. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love or mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these things, but approve of those who practice them. Think about that. Approving, or kind of, it's really what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, is that the immoral behavior became so acceptable that it was approved by the people, and that God had no choice but to pour out his wrath upon Sodom and Gomorrah. It's the same thing I think we're seeing today with the immorality, particularly when it comes to what we're seeing this month and things associated with that. So, people want to just they want to just line up, and even though they may not be of that particular those desires or whatever, there are so many people that approve it. Not just approve it, but encourage it. Mm-hmm. They're encouraging that which God abhors. And that's not something, we talk about Israel, but you read back in Jeremiah, I think it's 23, where God is going to bring the wrath, not just because of his faithfulness to Israel, but because of unrepentant sin. And there is a belief out there, I think it's dominion theology, that says it's the job of the church to bring everybody to Christ and make everything good and wonderful, and then he'll come back, which is just foolish because the sin nature that we all have is never, ever going to be overcome until Jesus returns. So he's going to come, he's going to judge, and I've mentioned this a gazillion times as well. It was either Billy Graham or his wife who said that if God doesn't judge America, he owes Sodom and Gomorrah an apology. So that's where we stand. And so what we have here are people that just choose of their own free will to ignore the gospel, and then God's ultimately going to turn them over. And I think it's like a disease. I think it's like it's just a cancer that spreads throughout the culture. And so here's what we read about when it comes to the strong delusion. And this should be a message, but if you think about it, those that don't know Christ, when you tell them or you try to tell them these things, although I don't think it's necessarily bad to tell them this, because this verse that we're going to read doesn't say that everyone will fall under the delusion, but certainly I think the majority will, that if we tell them, hey, one of these days, and I know a lot of people are leaving scriptures and books and messages behind for those that are left behind, and I think that's a good thing, because I do believe there'll be some that'll say, whoa, what's going on here? I know that they told me about the disappearing of all these people, and so it's good to tell them that what's going to lie ahead. And so what we read here is, let's just start in chapter 2 of 2 Thessalonians, verse 8. We won't read the rest of it because we went through it in pretty good detail not that long ago. But 2 Thessalonians 2, beginning in verse 8. The lawless one will be revealed. The lawless one is just another label for Antichrist, who, it's like somebody saying, is the Antichrist alive today? Well, absolutely he is. Because if the rapture is, let's just say hypothetically, it's 30 or 40 years away, which I don't think it is, but let's say it is. He's not going to be 6 years old when he comes on the scene. So he is definitely alive somewhere today and is being groomed by Satan. I was listening to a teaching just the other day about how Satan doesn't know when the rapture is going to take place. He knows there will be a rapture, and he knows that his time is short. But he doesn't know when all these things are going to take place. Pardon me?
Satan knows all that?
He does.
Time is short, etc.?
Yeah, he knows he knows the Bible. He knows the Bible. He knows it, but he doesn't know precisely when. He doesn't know when the rapture is going to take place. And so if we believe that the rapture is an imminent event, which every generation has believed during the church age, then he has been raising up leaders throughout history and grooming them to be, in case it happens during their time, the Antichrist. And you just look throughout history of various people that have come and gone, the Hitlers of the world and the Mussolinis, and go back to the time of Hadrian, and all the way back to the beginning of the church age, to the first century. He's been grooming people, and so he's clearly grooming somebody today to be the Antichrist. And a lot of people hearken back to that talk that Prince Charles gave not too long ago at the UN meeting, where he said that it's going to take trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to usher in this new one world system. Basically, it was a metaphor for there's not enough money in the world, so we need to do away with cash and implement some sort of digital system. And then he went on to say, so that he will be prepared. And a lot of people are speculating as to who the he is that he referred to. And I think he referred to him twice during that talk. And I don't make a whole lot out of it. He clearly doesn't know who Antichrist is, but there was some secret person that he was referring to. It could have been Klaus Schwab, I suppose, but there's just so much going on. But then it goes on to say, Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendor of his coming, which is a clear reference to Revelation 19 when Jesus comes back and he's going to destroy Antichrist and the false prophet, throw them immediately into the lake of fire. Their judgment will have already taken place. They're not going to be present at the great white throne judgment like all the other unbelievers throughout history. It says the coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with how Satan works. So this basically is saying Antichrist will be under the control and influence of Satan himself. And he will use all sorts of displays or power through signs and wonders. I mean, he is going to have the power through Satan. That's the Antichrist, and also the false prophet. We read in Revelation 13 that he's going to be able to call lightning down and do all of these seemingly miraculous things. In fact, we know that at some point, Antichrist is going to receive what is believed to be a fatal head wound, and then he's going to come back to life. So a lot of things are going to be happening. So imagine, there's delusion right there, is that, wow, look at the power. This guy must be good. He's powerful, so definitely we need to fall behind him. They're not going to know. And that's what happens. If you don't know God's word and you find yourself in the tribulation, the idea that people are going to be able to, at that point, say, well, I'll accept Christ at that point. A lot of people say that. Well, if what you're saying is true, we'll accept him then. But the question is, if you're not willing to do it now, what makes you think during the time of the tribulation you'll do it then? And I think there will be some, but at any rate. And because I'm saying the coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with how Satan works. He will use all sorts of displays of power through signs and wonders that serve the lie. So what is the lie? Well, Antichrist is going to be under influence of Satan. And Satan is always, I mean, he was cast out of heaven because he wanted to be like the Most High. He wanted to be co-creator, whatever you want to call it, with God. He even wants to be above God. So that's always been his objective, and he will think that he can do that through his proxy Antichrist. That the Antichrist will be worshipped as though he is the Most High. That's what the abomination of desolation is all about, when they place the image of Antichrist into the Holy of Holies in the rebuilt temple, and people will be expected to worship that image. And so that's what the lie is, that in fact, that Antichrist is the Messiah. Very likely the Messiah. So you have kind of a false trinity going on. You've got Satan depicted in kind of a crazy way as God the Father, Antichrist, who is in place of Christ, and then the false prophet, who will be essentially a type of the Holy Spirit, the one that performs all the miracles and does all the things. And all the ways that wickedness deceives those who are perishing. That's where we get to the deception, the delusion. They're perishing. Why are they perishing? Because they have rejected God. God's already turned them over. You know, and this idea that that they're going to be subjected to the tribulation, and some people would say, well, how could God allow that to happen? Well, God allows it to happen because they've made their own decisions. People will have no one to blame but themselves. You can't blame God for what's going to happen. They perish because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. And so here's the way I interpret that, is right now we're witnessing to people, hopefully, people are rejecting the truth that's happening all over the world. People are hearing it, but they're rejecting it. The rapture comes, and then, I don't want to say it's too late, but if we read these next couple of verses, it almost seems like for some people it's going to be. They perish because they refuse to love the truth. What's the truth? Jesus is the truth. They refuse to love him. They refuse to worship and accept him. And so they're going to perish. They perish because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. They rejected the gospel. So now the rapture's taken place, and they find themselves in the tribulation. We're gone. We're out of here. But the rapture has taken place. For this reason, God, imagine this, God is going to do it. He is going to send them a powerful delusion. He doesn't say what that delusion is, but if God's sending it, it's going to be pretty hard to overcome that. It's kind of like you go back to Romans 1 where he turns them over. And again, we know that God knows the hearts. He knows those that can be changed and will change. But there are just going to be those that refuse to accept. And so he's going to send them strong delusion so they will believe the lie. So God is going to contribute to their delusion. Now, I think this is pretty much a warning, in my view, to people who reject the gospel and find themselves in the tribulation. The Bible also says in Revelation 7 that multitudes from every nation, people, tribe, tongue will come to know Jesus Christ during the tribulation. So it could be some of these people, but there's also a lot of people that haven't heard the gospel. Think about Muslims around the world that haven't heard it. Certainly a lot of Jewish people, all the Jews will during the tribulation, at least most of them will accept Christ, people that haven't heard the gospel. So there is an opportunity for multitudes to come to know. And we know that you go into Revelation 14, the Bible says in the Olivet Discourse that the gospel must be preached to the whole world. That happens during the tribulation when the angels will go throughout the entire world, giving people that one last opportunity. So everybody will hear the gospel, but still there'll be those that will shake their fist at God, but there will be those that will accept him during the tribulation. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth but have delighted in wickedness. That to me is kind of a frightening thing. It says all will be condemned. But what does that mean? I think we can leave that to our own imaginations, and how that plays out will play out at some point in time. But that's kind of the delusion. There's certainly all other types of delusion. Right now we see delusion spreading all around us. We hear people being, we just went through a period. I would suggest with the what we just went through for the last couple of years, strong delusion in my view, that was a test of how far people go, how people could be, and not that it's, I'm not saying anything against the vaccine or anything like that, but people were so willing just to take what was being done, the lockdowns and all the other things that have just totally destroyed. And if you think about what we just came through, the impact that it's had on everything. So,
real quick about how the end of the world comes and where people will be missing and others. Well, we were just watching something on Jimmy Evans the other night on YouTube, and there's this new book. It's called "Where Are the Missing People?" and he suggests to get those and leave them in your car, or your home, or whatever. And it's a very simple, easy read.
Yeah, it's designed for that purpose, to leave behind for people. Right?
Yeah.
I heard that.
Yeah.
I heard that.
So the name of the book is "Where Are the Missing People?"
Yep.
For the fire.
Yep. Jimmy Evans.
Thank you.
So it's designed for people that are left behind. And, imagine all of a sudden millions and millions of people have disappeared. People are going to they're going to want to know. The Antichrist is going to come on the scene fairly quickly after that. I don't know how much longer after that. But that's not a bad idea, to leave those little things around for people to pick up.
Well, I go to LA Fitness, and there's always Jehovah's Witnesses brochures there.
Oh.
And guess what Linda does with them?
Oh, I like your little secret. Linda takes them.
I'll bring them to to the motel.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I get rid of it.
Yeah, that's good.
But then they might be getting rid of yours.
Well, I don't leave very many.
All right, a couple articles I came across, and I know I'm really hammering on this globalist thing, but there for a long time you could say it was just a conspiracy theory, but it's not. This is the real deal, and most of them are pretty somber. I hate to say that, but it is what it is. And here's one that, and I don't know if we necessarily all have to agree with everything that's being said here. Certainly not. These are people doing the best they can to make base what they see is going on as to what's going to happen. But one of the blogs that I've read a number of times, and I've read it here a number of times, is Economic Collapse blog, and it's written by a guy by the name of Snyder, and he's a pretty knowledgeable economist. And his article that came out on June 7th is entitled "4 Really Big Names That Are Warning That Major Economic Disaster is Ahead." And I'm not only going to read 3 of them, but here's what he says. "I hope you're enjoying these beautiful summer weekends while you still can, because it appears that very troubled times are dead ahead. Inflation continues to spiral out of control, even as economic activity in the U.S. dramatically slows down." So the question is, are we headed for a recession? You know, if you listen to the finance channels, you'll get all different types of opinions. And it's one of those things we won't know until we get there. If this quarter, which ends the end of this month, is negative in terms of growth, then it's technically the definition of a recession, because it would be 2 straight quarters. The question is, will there be a soft landing? Will things get better? Will they get worse? And so forth. Many have compared to what we are currently experiencing to the stagflation of the 70s. Stagflation basically is significant inflation coupled with low growth. Already we're starting to see a slowdown in real estate. Obviously with interest rates going up, real estate is beginning to slow down. The only thing that's keeping that really going right now is the fact that there's very little supply. But with the rising interest rates, and tomorrow the Fed's probably going to raise they're definitely going to raise 3/4 of a point more. So interest rates are beginning to spike. And what it is, it's the Fed doing everything they can to dampen inflation. So we'll see how successful they might be. The truth is, what we are facing will eventually be so much worse than anything we went through back in the 70s. A meltdown, this is just one guy's opinion, a meltdown of historic proportions is here, as you will see below. Some of the biggest names in the entire country are talking about it. On Monday, the average price of gasoline at the United States set another all-time record. Gas price spike keeps getting worse. The national average jumped to $4.87, and I think it's right about there now, isn't it? Still in that range?
$5.99. $4.99.
$4.99.
$4.99, yeah, okay.
Bristol's $4.89.
Yeah.
Actually, I see.
Yeah, the 509 I'm looking
Right
Yeah.
near Corbin Avenue. Oh.
Four bench up there.
That's up 25 cents in the past week and 59 cents in the past month. There are now 10 states where the average price of gasoline is $5 or higher, with the latest being Michigan and Indiana. Washington, D.C. is also above 5, and we're obviously very close to that. A 25-cent increase in 1 week is just insane. If it continues on this trajectory, the price of a gallon would go up about $1 a month. I can't imagine that will be the case, but stranger things have happened. Overall, the average price of a gallon of gasoline in the United States has now more than doubled since the current administration began its regime. How high will it be a year from now? The big question. Meanwhile, U.S. economic activity is really slowing down, and we're being warned to brace ourselves for the worst. The following are 4 really big names. Number 1 is a guy, Elon Musk. Musk, who says if you have a bad feeling about the U.S. economy, you're not alone. Elon Musk says that he has a super bad feeling about where the U.S. economy is heading, and he intends to reduce Tesla's workforce by approximately 10%. And I think I read today, right now the crypto markets are basically crashing. They're in trouble. And, if you think about it, and I didn't think about this because I had heard it on one of the stations, that they just went through one crash not that long ago, a crypto crash. And naturally, it was with the crash where the feds came out and said, we need to put regulations in place. There's no way, in my view, because it's unregulated, that crypto can continue. Now, we're going to see a digital currency, no question about that, but crypto is in, I think it may have another little surge here and there, but I think it's on its last legs.
Plus, they don't even know who is down and who actually owns it or
Right. It's not
it.
something you can put your hands on, and we live in a controlled system, or gaining control, so that's just something that they can't allow to go on. So Coinbase is reducing its staff or its tenure by number of people by 18%. Amazon 10%, and reducing their workforce by 10%. And of course, a lot with Amazon has to do with the supply chain and not being able to get products. So maybe that'll turn around. Musk has a super bad feeling about the economy. He wants to cut 10%. There's another one, Robert Kiyosaki, and his advice has helped millions of people all over the globe. In the past, he was known for his relentless optimism, but he is now almost as pessimistic about our economic future as I am. For example, he tweeted out the following back on March 8th. Question, do you have a plan B? We are in the biggest bubble in world history. Again, one person's opinion. Bubbles in stocks, real estate, commodities, and oil. Future? Possible depression with hyperinflation. My plan B, be an entrepreneur, stay out of the stock market, create your own assets, use debt as money. I don't understand what he's saying. Save gold, silver, bitcoins. This was his I think March 8th suggestion on the Bitcoin was probably a little premature. I'm not sure you can do that now. Does anybody think that what we're seeing is not planned, is not being orchestrated with all of this stuff going on? I mean, there's just no other logical explanation. We have in this country 100 years worth of oil and natural gas, and we know how to get it out of the ground. Why aren't they allowing it? That's your generally your reaction to that. Why aren't they allowing it? We just don't. It's just crazy. Or the. Pardon me?
2 years ago, we were getting it out of the ground.
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
2
Yeah.
years ago?
Right.
Yeah.
100 years.
Yeah. So, but I mean, it's just one example in this border issue. I mean, Mayorkas will sit before the Senate or the Congress, whichever he is testifying before, and sit there and say our borders are secure. What?
Just walking through.
It's just. What? Why are you doing this?
He's right. You can't go to Mexico without checking through. Okay, so they are secure. Just on the opposite.
But do you
Yeah, so what?
Here he goes. See, every week he gets himself all worked up.
But you know the people coming over the border and how they're dressed?
Yeah.
They've got new sneakers, they got decent hair, they got clean clothes, so they're just all...
I heard that this baby formula that's been...
There's another orchestrated event.
That they're sending it a lot to the borders.
Right.
And that regular Americans like us
Right.
can't get
Right.
it.
Yeah.
It's all the immigrants.
No other
that are coming
countries
in.
having the steel prices we're having.
Right.
No other countries having the issues with the baby formulas we're having. It's all about the importing, the exporting of the U.S. economy.
Really?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the planned demolition And it's. I mean, you just think about when you hear something that is so totally illogical, like the director of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, sitting there, and you know he's lying because his lips are moving, and he's saying that our borders are secure, and he said, it's just crazy. Yeah. And the Department of Energy had, laughing when she was asked about increasing oil supplies. It's not going to happen. So it's definitely, and I think it's intended to move us toward this one world system. Now, they didn't necessarily plan on what they've run into in this country. And we'll get to that in just a moment because there's some good stuff on that. But, we've got 30%, 40% of the population that are saying we're not going to go along with this. So we'll see what happens. April 15th, he boldly declared that a hyperinflation depression has arrived. Then Wile E. Coyote coming, biggest bubble bust coming, baby boomers' retirement to be stolen, $10 trillion in fake money spending ending. But yet that cash is all out there, and I think the Fed's trying to pull it back in, but that's what's generating the inflation to a great extent is this fiat money that's been printed and just infused into the system. Then there's other people that he quotes. But let's just, as he says here, let's do the math. U.S. total debt, $90 trillion. Unfunded liabilities, $169 trillion. Total, $259 trillion, minus all U.S. assets of $193 trillion. We're still, if we sold every single U.S. asset, in debt to the tune of $66 trillion. So he says, actually, the U.S. economy contracted, as we said, during the first quarter, and if it contracts again in the second, we're in a recession. So again, we saw a lot of people that have been very optimistic and are now starting to turn. And these aren't just people that are studying the Bible. These are just normal people, or people that don't know the Lord necessarily. Here's a couple of articles on, I'll get back to this one, but this has to do with, does anybody ever read Leo Holman? He's a real expert on the Great Reset. And he wrote an article that I'm a little skeptical of it, but his latest article is entitled, "We've Entered the Kill Phase of the Great Reset." And we'll talk a little bit about that. But there's some stuff regarding the a perspective out of Bill Koenig's weekly update that John's familiar with from the Eye to Eye author. He says, while reading headline after headline and sensing the tone of this news, it appears that we are moving into a very precarious summer and fall. The news is intense. If you extrapolate the potential repercussions further, it could be earth-shaking. We have the ridiculous January 6 hearings going on live TV. Another attempt to stop Trump's political aspirations and demoralize his political basis. However, this will do the opposite. Over 90% of Trump's news during his first 4 years in office were negative, according to NBC. That's really neither here nor there. We saw the tragedy of Uvalde, Texas, occur at the same time the NRA was gathering. And I don't want to get really too much in that, but think about this guy that was trying to assassinate, if he could have, would have assassinated a Supreme Court justice. And if that decision comes out and it is what people think it is, we're going to have one terror-filled summer when the Roe v. Wade thing comes out, if in fact it knocks it out. The leftists in the U.S. media are becoming more evil by the day. No organization in the country is more damaged than they. It's almost like Pravda. I mean, it's just, you can't believe anything they say, and it's so sad, really, if you think about it. They stir up racial division. You think about some of the people on some of the different news channels and how they just It's always this racial stuff, trying to fuel this division. And this division they're creating is right out of Rules for Radicals, right out of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. Divide and conquer. Divide people. Divide them because of race. Divide them because of sexuality. Divide them because of this, that, and everything else. And then create this great division that the globalists can come in and take care of.
Well, at the same time, we're gonna lose all our power.
Yeah.
If this division keeps up, there will be no power here in the United States.
You
Mainstream
think we
me-
have power now?
No.
Strength.
And
The
controlled by
country
China.
will
They may control everything we import, export,
Right.
consume, ship. And you think we have control over the presidential?
Did you,
Okay.
listen to Jan Markell discuss?
Yeah.
I guess they got that thing with the World Health Organization got kubosh for the time being.
For the time being, but it's still being looked at. They'll resurrect that. So, Great Reset. This is by a guy by the name of Bill Wilson. Just a couple of high points. The most dangerous threat to the exercise of religion and freedom of speech in your lifetime and perhaps history to date is not a theory, but a conspiracy. It's called the Great Reset. Reset complicit. Let's say a Great Reset complicit news media. This is a situation where there is no need to embellish the truth. It's bad enough. Over the next few days, the Daily Jot will try to explain the Great Reset and goes on to talk about how they're coming after Christians and really what's been going on for a long time. So a lot about the Great Reset, obviously. And I'm not going to get into this. If you want to, there's an article entitled Globalists Have Entered into the Kill Phase of the Great Reset by Leo Hohmann. It's pretty interesting. And I don't know if anybody saw anybody's familiar with The Economist magazine. And that was the cover. You can't see it up front. The Economist, the coming food catastrophe, and all of the kernels on the wheat
Skulls.
are skulls. So that's on the cover of Economist for the week of May 21st. So, Rockefeller. Here's just a couple of quips from it's kind of interesting, but. Okay, here's a couple of things I think you might find interesting. They've told us, these are the elites, their plans ahead of time. They always do. We will own nothing. We will have no privacy, and we will learn to like being totally dependent on the government and its corporate partners for our very survival. I think it's going to get to that point. But my view is that it doesn't get to that point until after the rapture. I could be wrong, but I don't see it getting to the point. I think the stage is being set. Anybody that thinks that there's not going to be that type of control better think again, because there has to be. If Antichrist is going to control all buying and selling and everything, then there has to be that kind of control. David Beasley, Executive Director of the United Nations World Food Program, spoke at Davos, which was the WEF meeting back at the end of May, and had cheery news. In his formal address to the WEF, Beasley explained, and he's happy about it, that the global food situation was already bad before the Ukraine war, but the situation has escalated to become what he has called the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. So this food thing that's coming, it's in the works, has the potential to be devastating. But isn't it interesting that it makes these elitists almost giddy over what's going to happen?
I heard today in the news that the Ukraine food problem, getting food out of Ukraine, from their fields to North Africa, the Middle East, to other parts of the world, is basically blocked by the Russians along the southern shore. And I heard a military expert today recommend or agree to, the commentators suggested or asked, and the military expert agreed that it's probably soon going to come to the U.S. having to send warships to escort the cargo ships with the grain to get them out of, I forgot what the body of water is on the southern Ukraine there, to get them past the Russians. To keep North Africa and the Middle East essentially from starving, because they're already short on food supplies. And if those ships can't get out of Ukraine, because they've got all this harvest grown. I don't know how much it is compared, for example, to last year, but a lot of it grown, and the problem now is getting it out of the country to deliver it where it needs to go.
Well, on top of that, you got Russia stealing it and sending it to Turkey.
Yeah.
Right. They caught 3,000 tons or something. Okay,
so this Leo Holman, who's really he's a crackerjack when it comes to World Economic Forum. I suggest you might want to pay attention to what he says, but everything he says makes perfect sense, and it's just everything's being orchestrated. I mean, it's just really sad.
What was his name again?
Pardon me?
What was his name again?
Leo Hohmann, Hohmann. Michelle Bachmann, who is now at Regent University, or is it Regent? Yeah, or Robertson Political Science School, had him at a seminar that she held back in May. Everybody know who Michelle Bachmann is? Yeah, she's a pretty sharp lady. So he was one of the speakers.
She was where?
Jan Markell on her show Thursday.
Oh, good.
Yeah, she was on. She's on kind of regularly.
Okay, one miscellaneous thing I came across: oil shortages, and here's an article entitled "A Warning from Ireland: Oil Emergency Exercise Shows What Could Be Coming." Government officials in Ireland recently wargamed a fuel crisis scenario wherein fuel had to be rationed and companies were told to enforce mandatory work-from-home orders to reduce consumption. According to an exclusive expose from the Irish Independent, participants convened in a confidential meeting on May 27th at the National Emergency Coordination Center to participate in a hypothetical oil emergency exercise wherein Ireland faced 20% diesel supply deficits in September and a 35% drop in December. And this is just a polygon. It's a practice thing instead in case that happens. But here are some of the things that they said they would have to do if they got to the point where it's necessary to ration gasoline and oil. One, the government would impose a work-from-home mandate for non-essential workers. So here we go again. The government would impose travel bans on non-essential car travel. Speed limits would be imposed on various roads. Fuel rationing would begin with a firm limit set on individual purchases, likely irrespective of automobile or necessity. And a current curious emergency scheme would be implemented to see people with odd-numbered license plate alternating refueling days with people with even numbers.
We know about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember that as a
What do you
kid.
do if you have a vanity plate?
I was just gonna ask.
Did they do it? They did it with a house number.
Yeah.
You get mine. Nothing.
I remember.
With the markers.
Was it markers? Was it?
Yeah, it was the markers.
What are
Just the
markers?
plates.
Your
The license plate.
Oh, what if
Now
it's
let's quickly take a look. This is a familiar couple of chapters, but let's quickly turn to Ezekiel 38. Before we go there, keep your finger there and go back to Isaiah chapter 17. I don't know if you've been listening to the news, but Israel has, over the last week or so, done some military exercises, bombed parts of Damascus, and that is causing no shortage of angst on the part of Russia. Let's take a look at Isaiah chapter. Where is that? The Damascus thing.
17,
Pardon me?
17.
verse 1. 17.
Oh, 17, yeah. Okay, Damascus, it's Isaiah, thank you, Marilyn. Isaiah 17, a prophecy against Damascus. A prophecy against Damascus. See, Damascus will no longer be a city, but will become a heap of ruins. Now, there are many people that say that this obviously is yet to be fulfilled. Damascus, Syria, is the capital of Syria. It has never been reduced to a pile of rubble. But if we trust God's word and know it to be true from cover to cover, like I think we all do, this is yet to happen. And a lot of people think that this will happen either slightly before or maybe at about the same time as the invasion of Israel by the players identified in Ezekiel 38. So what's happening is Iran is bringing military or bringing weapons, trying to smuggle weapons in through Syria. And they're bringing them in on commercial planes. And that's why Israel took out the runways, took out one of the main buildings at the airport, not because of Syria, but it's because of what Iran is doing. Iran is doing everything in its power to bring weapons and military and arsenals and so forth into Syria so that they are ready at some point to attack Israel. And I don't know if you heard Amir, one of his latest updates, he said that Iran has reached the point of being able to build a nuclear bomb. And he basically said, this is it. And so what he means by this is it is that Israel is in a very difficult position. And all the military exercises they've been conducting recently that they have been undergoing are in preparation for some sort of attack on Israel. They have to attempt to take out those nuclear facilities. So things are really heating up there. But we know, as we read Ezekiel 38, that there's going to be a Confederacy of Nations. And I think everybody's pretty familiar with what this is. But in just going down through some of the highlights here, where it says in 38, Son of man, set your face against Gog. We know that Gog is a leader, and that he is the leader from the land of Magog. And Magog is a Genesis 6 family whose descendants ultimately settled to the north of Israel. So this is a clear reference to Russia, as is Meshach and Tubal. So we have Gog, the leader of Magog, Meshach and Tubal, and God says, set your face against them. So Gog, if this, could it be Putin? It well could be Putin. But if it's not Putin, it's some leader of what we know today to be Russia. And think about the fact that Ezekiel is writing this several hundred, I think roughly 600 or 500 years BC. And he's prophesying about a time when Israel would be attacked by this nation. There was no major military nation north of Israel at that time. And so with that in mind, we've got this in Russia with under Putin, and I think Putin had a lot of respect for Netanyahu, but Russia Putin had a pretty good relationship with Israel, but recently things have been kind of turning around, which you would expect, because this invasion is right at the doorstep. But here's an article that states as follows: in an unusually bitter condemnation, Russia lashed out at Israel following a pre-dawn strike blamed on Israel at Damascus airport. And so everybody knows it was Israel that did it. And so now Russia is condemning Israel. So what does that mean? Well, a year ago, they wouldn't have done that, because they basically gave Israel the authority, and Russia controls the airspace over Syria. They gave Israel the authority to do what they felt they needed to do. But now we see this turn, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that Israel basically has condemned Russia for what's going on in Ukraine. And so Putin looks at that as kind of a slap in the face. And so it goes on to say, an Israeli satellite intelligence firm purchased images showing significant damage to the runways, which is said disabled the airport. So is this the beginning of the fulfillment of Isaiah 17:1? It could be. Then listen to this. This is really, you talk about being hypocritical. Russia's foreign ministry on Friday evening condemned, quote, the vicious practice of Israeli strikes on civilian infrastructure. Imagine Russia saying that. So, I mean, what does this prove? It demonstrates the satanic power that's in place everywhere right now. That he could come on just like our Homeland Security guy telling people that our borders are secure. You know, or talk about delusion. And the same thing here. This guy's saying that for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's like the pot calling the kettle black, but also they call it a vicious practice, but he says they were provocative, what Israel did, and in violation of the basic norms of international law. So what do we see here? We see a beginning of a turn by Russia against Israel. And so at some point in time, that whole thing with Ukraine is going to end. And when it does, my guess is that they will begin to divert their attention to Israel. And as we read here, it says that God says, I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen, and so forth. So what it's saying here is that God will put the hook in Gog's jaw and pull him and his army, along with Turkey, along with Iran, Libya from the south, and the Sudan, and move against Israel. It'll be a giant military confederacy. So what could the hook be? Well, I think the hook is pretty clear. Right now, Israel has trillions of cubic feet of natural gas. Russia's primary means of revenue, their primary source of revenue, is natural gas, which is being cut off, which is being blocked. To say nothing of the fact they charge 10 times what Israel would charge, and so Israel has agreed to build a pipeline that will ultimately go up and provide natural gas to Europe, Germany, and so forth. And so Russia now has the motivation to go in, or will at some point in time, and try to take over those gas supplies, those gas fields. So,
because there seems to be a lot of talk now about Europe and that wanting that gas from Israel before wintertime. So
really?
that seems like the perfect.
So it is definitely. Susan and I were talking last week. Could gas be the hook? Could energy be the hook? I don't think there's any doubt. I don't think it is. And you think about how everything is playing out, and how, although at the same token, I don't know if you've heard or not, but but Russia's ruble is holding its value, and it's now one of the stronger economies in the world in spite of what's going on. You know, I mean, it's just, you can't make this stuff up. But at any rate, what we're watching is the coming together with Iran doing everything they can to place themselves right at Israel's border, with Russia getting ready to make its move on Israel. I think we're very close to seeing the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38 as well as Isaiah 17:1. I mean, those things I think could happen at any time. The question is, and I don't know if maybe people have some thoughts on this, but how does this play into Israel and Iran going directly against each other? I don't know. I mean, it's just a lot to be determined. But I think Israel, now that Iran has the ability, and Iran's been doing everything they can to develop a nuclear weapon, and according to Amir, they're there. So all they have to do is continue to enrich some. They could have they've got enough enriched uranium to build, I think, like 4 bombs now. And so it's just a question of going forward and doing it, and see what happens.
Seems like with that and with Damascus, that seems to be the scenario that might make it uninhabitable.
Yeah. So in the meantime, you talk about a convergence of signs. You know, I mean, you've got all the economic issues. You've got the World Economic Forum. You've got globalization. We talked a little bit about the World Health Organization and the amendments that the Biden administration wrote to essentially take our sovereignty and give it our healthcare sovereignty and give it to the World Health Organization. That was discussed, and I think there were like 19 provisions, 18 of which were rejected, but one that remains, and they're going to continue to study. It didn't happen like a lot of people felt at the meeting in May, but it's still on the agenda. And so we got that going on. We got the economy going on. We got the supply chain thing. Now that Singapore's starting to open up a little bit, you can almost see the day coming when our ports will be crowded again. So, and then diesel fuel. I think diesel is just a huge problem. The cost of diesel and fertilizer. You know, this the derailment of that train carrying all that potash up in Canada. Was that just a coincidence? I don't know. How did that happen? Enough potash to be used as a lot of fertilizer. The war in Russia, the threats of China going into Taiwan, North Korea messing around with nuclear bombs, and you know, just the satanic, the lawlessness, all these things. I mean, you just can't make it all up. And I would suggest everything we're seeing, we can see it and go back to the Bible and find exactly where all this stuff is identified. If you think about the Bible, the last book of the Bible was done, what, roughly 90 AD or so, was finished, the whole Bible. So all these things we're seeing unfold with absolute precision have been recorded for 2,000 years, at least, some 3,000, some 3,500 years. It's just amazing that God's word is as precise as it is, and Bible prophecy helps us to see that. So, comments, questions?
With all the talk about January 6th, what's going to happen January 6th in like 2023?
January 6th?
January, 2023?
Yeah.
Bob, I got a question, and it may come off kind of
Okay.
harsh, but you've got an iPod that passed. You have that Epoch newspaper.
Oh,
We're all talking about this. Is there any way that we as a group can get here and do a publication. Write something that can go on your podcast, go on the computer, like all this crap we're getting from people, and breaks this stuff down. And I use the word idiots loosely to a point. These people that sit here and look at their computers, look at their iPhones, and they see all these messages and all this stuff, and did you see this and did you see that? And they take it, most of them, as gospel, it's happening or it's going to, and they don't seem to get upset about it because they don't hear the other side. Is there anything we can do if this place and maybe another church, that you can't be the only ones talking about this?
There's a lot of people out there doing it, and not that it's the be all and end all, but I have recorded my first podcast, and I'm in the process of trying to, everybody knows my technical abilities. Which are
Don't feel bad.
virtually. You want to watch something funny? Watch me try to edit that thing. By the time I start, I do this.
I have a lot of ideas. I just don't want to step on your toes.
No.
I come out of here every Tuesday night, marrying a wet hen, and I'm like, sign me up. Where are we going? I'm ready to do it.
Good for you, girl.
Right.
I'm going to invite you to one of my podcasts if I ever figure out completely how to do it. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not joking.
Yeah. There's nothing that's we're wide open.
I sit here and I write stuff, and history was always my best subject, math my lousy, so somewhere in between I can function. Sorry.
Good girl.
Thank you, Judy.
Yeah.
I want to say one thing though. I think when we leave here, we should feel generated to go out and talk to people. We should, feel energy. Right?
Well,
but the whole thing is to let us know God's word so we can understand what's going on. So we have peace about what's going on. I mean, granted, if you listen to the news, the economy is not in the best shape and all this, but we know the Lord is in charge and He's taking care of us.
Well, there's some things I've been hearing tonight, and I'm going, I can go home and I can write something about this. I'll give it to him. If he doesn't get, I'll give it to him, and he can, make it sound like him, and
if
gist
you're
of it.
willing to get that message across to people,
Sure,
that
yes.
would be a good thing. A positive thing.
I go home sometimes on Tuesday night, and I'm like, well, that's nice. What are we talking about? What are we doing about it? I get we're not supposed to, marching away or where some of the church charters are, like Martin Luther King did with his thingamajig, whatever. But I'm seeing all these people get out here and march about this and march about that, or raise Holy Toledo about something, and I'm thinking, it's time for the silent majority to get busy and do something.
You're right, Judy.
And see, Bob, you told me to tell her to suck it up. She's teaching you some things, huh?
I don't think we had to tell him.
I'm nice and polite and think, well, they know more than I do, sometimes, whatever.
No. You know what the answer is? There's only one answer, and that's Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That is the answer to all.